What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and a supply chain executive have in common? Sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people really do in their jobs. The stories, the struggles, the coffee breaks. The real stuff you won't find in any job type.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get
Casually
Pro! Hey!
Awesome. So today we are meeting with a wonderful human being. Rachid Maliki is a supply chain executive, a chef, and a football fan, all rolled into one. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity. It's great to see you all and in being a part of this wonderful experience.
Absolutely. So, just briefly, could you explain to us what you do and why is it so cool?
It's a very good question, Charles. So let me start with the fun part. In the organization, most of the time when people are asking me what I do, I would always say that I'm actually the person who takes the blame for everything when sales is not going great. Because typically I would say, yes, I mean, it's typically I would say in organization, two functions in companies are actually the bad guys, is either supply chain or IT. Because salespeople, they will always justify the fact that they are not capable to sell either because of supply chain, and then they will tell you we don't have the right product. And if you demonstrate that, actually, guess what? We have everything we need in the distribution warehouse. They will tell you, then we have an issue in the systems. That's the funny part of it. But in the real world, what I do actually is I help a global organization achieve multi-million-dollar cost saving. I really help them improve their operational excellence, revenue growth, and how I do that is a simple one, is really through strategic supply chain operation management and optimization. Most of the companies actually want to have an optimized supply chain that can accelerate the growth and drive efficiencies. But in general, and I would say very often, they feel like their supply chain is dragging down their operations and consuming their resources. And, there's so many stories around the world that actually where a lot of companies lost the trust of consumer because they're, I would say, non-ability to deliver the goods. So that's where I come actually and help this organization putting in place an agile and sustainable strategies. And I like to say that I have a magical finger to turn supply chain from cost center into strategic assets. So that's literally what I do.
Interesting. So, listen, I'm well aware that there's always a bad guy in business, but I think I can get on board with being mad if I order something and it says it's going to be here in a week and it takes a month. So, can you tell us a little bit about the more, I guess, simplified version of how things start from where they are and get to the customer ultimately, or at least in your experience?
Yeah, again, it's very funny you're asking that question. I always find it extremely difficult to explain what I do to family members and friends. And typically when they ask you, "Hey, Rashid, what do you do?" and you say, "Well, I'm in supply chain management." The first reflection or the first comment you got is, "So you drive a truck?" And I, no, that's not what I do. So to answer your question, Charles, I think what I would like to do is basically go into one of my principles, which is literally, go back to the basics. And in my view, I think if you manage to explain to a kid what do you do, and the kids understand exactly what you're referring to without going into much details, I think you really achieve great understanding of your job function. So I would like to say that actually my role as a supply chain executive is to ensure that I have the right product at the right time, at the right place, with the right cost. And that's summarize the whole chain of supply chain. And back to your questions, can I explain how it works? Yes, there's, few things to mention. I've been actually, dealing with the end-to-end supply chain. And for me, the analogy of that end-to-end supply chain is think about, raising a kid. You have to make a kid You have to have a period of time where your kid is a child. There is cries, there is sleepless night, there is everything, and but you see the kids grow and grow until it becomes a man. So it's typically that's the way I would like to reflect on supply chain. So starting from a development, so you have an idea coming from a design team or coming from the commercial team. You start doing the development through sampling, through protos, till you get really final aspect of the product that everyone is happy with it and there is a final sign off. Then you need to scale to the production. And to scale to the production, you have to work with partners around the world, factories everywhere. And depends on the sales and the forecast you start producing. And obviously, there is something that is governing all of this, which is what I would call the go to market calendar, because you have to have a specific deadline to deliver the goods. Otherwise, you will be losing market share if you're late, as you said, back to your point, by 3 months. And also, on the top of all of this, you have to keep the consumer on the back of your mind, which, if you are promising to a consumer to deliver a certain time, you have to ensure that you're respecting your commitment to the consumer, because we are, at the end of the day, supply chain is, I would call it, is a function that would help the growth of the company, but would help the growth of the company through actually respecting the commitment and delivering on time so that the company and the salespeople
Hmm.
can do their job and sell the product. So I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in terms of my understanding, my personal understanding, you are the means for ultimately recognizing the need, or I guess respecting the contract with your customer, because at some point someone is going to want to buy a product and they're going to have certain stipulations around it: price, how long it's going to take to get the product, where it's going to be delivered to, and you make sure that everything that is agreed upon between that customer and the business is followed through in its entirety.
Correct. And that's what I mentioned earlier, Charles. I think is a great insight from yourself. That's what I mentioned. In companies, the development process and the production and the delivery to the market itself is governed by what I would call the go-to-market calendar. And that's all the deadline that every function in the business has to respect. And the reason why great companies have actually a go-to-market strategy and also go-to-market discipline, because you don't want to be handing everyone from different part of the business, especially what I would call the front end. And when I
Mm,
refer to the front end is basically the design team and the brand, not talking long enough. We're talking too much time actually, and squeeze the time for what I would call the back end, and that's supply chain. And in hoping that everyone will be able to put the rabbit out of the hat. You can do it once, you can do it twice, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the rules. Otherwise, you're putting the pressure on the back end. So everyone in the organization have to respect his part of the job, and he has to respect his deadline so that you ensure there is a smooth production. Because also then, when we put the pressure on supply chain, ultimately also is a chain effect. That's why we call it supply chain and the ripple effect. If we get a
mm.
pressure from the sales and we get the pressure from the brand, ultimately our factories and our partners externally will get the pressure to deliver on time. And trust me, there is always the Murphy law. When you try to push things and you then give them time, that's where everything goes wrong.
Oh yeah, I think Jeff and I are well acquainted with Mr. Murphy and his laws. Uh,
Oh.
in terms of kind of the basic process for getting supply chain up and running, what do you find is the most challenging part of getting things together? I think, you mentioned that there's so many moving parts. Is there one specific area where you say this has to be in lockstep? Otherwise, maybe things fall apart further down the line.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, Charles. And I think, the beauty of supply chain is actually you are in the middle of every function in the business. I mean, and you should have a great relationship with the finance team, with the sales team, with the marketing team, with the design team, with the brand. And there is so many moving parts. And actually that's probably, I would say, the challenge, even internally, because people don't
Mm,
get the size and the dimension of the things that we're trying to get together to make a product. And I would say, for example, in the business, the different function also represent different mindset, if I may refer to it that way, meaning when you're dealing with the design team, and that's not a reflection on the design team. This is more just an observation. I'm not a finger point on anyone. It's just the design team. Typically, that's the role. That's is the design. Is the dream. Is trying to achieve something that actually no one ever did achieve it. And sometimes decision making is a little bit taking too long because it's also in internally. It's not even about the consumer because I'll give you an example. I mean, I worked all my career in the retail business, in the fashion. And sometimes we have to go through another set of proto. When I talk about a proto, is a physical garment that you will have to receive from a factory. And that might take almost 3 weeks to get a sample. And that's because the design team, for example, is not 100% sure on the color of the thread. And that takes time. So, one of the recommendations we put in place is let's work with the factories directly. And in one of the best things that we've done in one of the companies actually I worked with is, go with the design team and work directly in the factory. Don't, because, i.e., if you got a design team located in LA, for example, but the factories are in China, at least losing 6 days in DHL transport. By the time you get the sample, customs clearance and everything. The other way around, if you take, and by the way, from a cost perspective, it's going to cost you as much as the flight to China. The other way around is take the team, go to the factory, plan properly, work with the factory there. And if there is anything you need, the factory is capable to give it to you straight away. You sign off all your product and you come back and then we're ready to go to the production.
Rachid, let's dive into the reality of your day-to-day experience. Can you tell us exactly what are the activities that you're doing? I imagine you're doing phone calls, you're going to meetings, maybe you're researching about alternatives to find the cheapest cost. Could you tell us about your typical Tuesday? How does it look like?
My typical Tuesday. Wow, that's an interesting question, Jeffrey. Let me tell you something about supply chain actually and why I love this job. There is no Mondays, there is no Tuesdays, there is no Wednesdays in supply chain because when you think you actually managed to solve one issue, there is another one coming and there is another one coming because you're moving so many parts. You're dealing with logistics, you're dealing with distribution warehousing, you're dealing with development, you're dealing with a lot of other things. And also on the top of this, you're dealing with people. So typically at Tuesday, I would say Tuesday start always with, and that's what I like also a lot, is start with meeting with the team, my direct report. Sorry, I forgot when I was talking about supply chain, end-to-end supply chain. End-to-end supply chain covers a lot of function within the same umbrella. So I had product development, I had sourcing, and I had procurement. I have production and supply planning. I have forecasting. I have sustainability. I have logistic. I have distribution. And even one company had customer service, then you're closing the loop.
I think you have the kitchen sink too, right?
Yes.
You mentioned, Rachid, that your job has a lot to do with dealing with fires. And every time a problem is fixed, you have to deal with another problem. No, doesn't that feel, or can it feel overwhelming to always have to deal with problems? Or I wonder if you're sometimes also trying to look at what works well or making a list of everything that worked well for those times where you might feel surrounded by problems.
Absolutely. And look, you call them problems. I would like to call them opportunities because there is always rooms for improvement.
Wow.
And typically what I would say is, we don't only look to the things that are not working. Obviously, the things that are not working help us to get better. But the reality, there is a lot of things that are working. And the best advice from me in terms of supply chain, if you are really well planned and prepared, and you have absolutely a crystal communication with all your partners, whether they are internal or external, I think you can manage to go through a lot of things. And I'll give you an example. No one is actually concerned about late deliveries. Yes, in a way, it's affect the business, but as far as people know about it, there is always solution to work it around. And we can always take a decision, for example, as a company to air freight the goods. We can always take a decision, for example, to put something in the store. What you don't want to be doing is telling, for example, the store staff on a Saturday, sorry guys, the production is not here, and they are planning it for Monday. I don't think that's fair to them. And but if you're planning and there is a proper communication, everyone is actually anticipating and trying. You know, in all the organization, Jeffrey, I think everyone is trying to help. And I tell the team something that is fundamental is one of the principle I work with is positive intent. That's very important in companies. Everyone should be really open to positive intent. It's not because, this happens, I was trying to do something to stop you from doing your job. No, it's the opposite. Let's find a way to collaborate and find a solution together. So yeah, so there is always challenges, but there is also a lot of things that are actually extremely working well. And I take pride of the team because I couldn't do this alone. I always had a great team that actually, been supportive, worked hard, and managed to deliver beyond expectation. I hope I managed to answer your question, Jeffrey.
So there is just an impossible amount of communication I think you go through on a day-to-day basis. How do you maximize your communication? Because I think a lot of people can get in their idea how to speak to one, two, three handful of people, but you're talking to a handful of people per operation, per section every day. What do you do to maximize your level of communication?
Yeah, I think from the conversation, I agree, Charles. It might sound overwhelming the amount, and people would think that we're having probably thousands of emails on a daily basis. But there are other ways. There are other ways really to stream down the communication internally and also externally.
Hmm.
And I could refer to, for example, two at least internally that really would help organization in general and supply chain leaders. I mean, you should have your own dashboard, and that gives all the information around, warehousing and distribution, your logistic, your on-time delivery. And you don't have to talk about everything, by the way. You only talk about the exceptions. The assumption there
Mm.
is everything is on time unless there is a certain exception to the rules, and that's the exception that you need to mention to people. So that could happen through the dashboard, for example. The other one that we have on a monthly basis is called a sales and operation meeting. And that's also a meeting that gathers actually all the function decision making within the organization. There is marketing, there is finance, sometimes also the CEO is joining the meeting. There is obviously myself or someone from my team representing supply chain. There is the brand. There's a lot of people. And the idea really is talk about first what is coming in the next 12 months, and also more important is, we compare the what I would call the S, and that's the sales. We talk about what is the P, and that's all the production in the pipeline, and whether if there is anything that we need to take as an action. So imagine, for example, you're coming to that sales operation meeting, Charles, and in the sales people saying, oh, we have a fantastic month of sales. But guess what?
Mm.
We are sold out in that particular item and that particular item. So these are the type of conversation that happens in that meeting. And my role as a supply chain head is to go back and tell them, okay, I mean, I hear what you need. Give me a couple of days to reach out to my partners and see what we can do. And that's where I take all the actions from that meeting and go and talk to all my partners around the world, suppliers, fabrics, supplier, etc. Get everyone together in one room, virtually speaking, because they are all in different part of the world. And together we come in to find a solution. And sometimes really it does fit in the schedule of the sales people, but sometimes doesn't fit. But again, that's the type of information you're bringing back to the next meeting and saying, guys, by the way, unfortunately, we tried hard, but the production will not be really on the time you ask for, but it's going to be 15 days. Is this still acceptable for you or not before we push the button? So while it seems there is a lot of communication, but actually there is also a lot of face-to-face meeting. And I'm a big believer, Charles. I don't like mails in general. I would say pick up a phone and then speak to the person, and also more important, just walk the floor and go and talk to the person. That's the way who I am.
Yeah, I think we are in a similar mindset for explicit communication. I I personally hate emails because it's so hard to figure out what are you thinking, what are you feeling during that time when there are so many more effective ways to communicate. But on top of that, when you're really communicating in such key areas and critical areas. I'm sure the difference between an email and seeing the look on a factory manager's face when you say, "Hey, can you have this done in 15 days?" And he's like, "That's a 15-month operation." Might key you into some key details that you might have to run up the chain, right? But I think this is a really interesting intersection between people and operations that most people don't really consider until they have to figure out from beginning to end where an item or product goes. When you are coordinating with a team, I think one of the most difficult things that any leader does is delegate because you have to make sure that your team members are really doing what they're doing it well, and able to communicate, okay, hey, this might be an issue, or this might be a problem, or this might be a really interesting opportunity to make things better. How do you go about finding people for your team?
Uh, I mean, it's an interesting question there, Charles. Typically, I would say, I don't know. I mean, I would call it a species. I mean, the people working in supply chain, typically they are a little bit in the mindset of organization and planning.
Mm,
And I have a little bit of a criteria. I give a little bit more higher percentage to the planning side and the organization versus the technical side. So for me, the
mm,
best of supply chain people are actually the one that are combining soft skills and planning and organization side of it. Because, while you could be a great engineer in your mind, but if you're not organized and you're not planning properly, it's not going to get you anywhere. So I rather take someone who's probably less skillful in terms of certain aspects of the job, but has 80% of his skills around planning and organization, because that's what we need in supply chain. The rest, you can always learn through the job. And, through the journey of leadership, I met a lot of great people. And one of the best advices I got from a gentleman long time ago, he said, you have to be as a sponge and learn from different aspects, because supply chain is not only unfortunately one function, is different function, and every function has its own challenges and has own opportunities, but also has a different set of skills that you require. So compare between production to logistic is a completely different beast. And the idea is really be a sponge and immerse yourself on those functions and learn. So I'm not the subject matter expert in every single field, but I have a fairly good knowledge on each department. But that's why I rely heavily on my teams to tell me what we are supposed to do. And I would like to refer to the founder of Apple's, where he said we hire smart people to tell us what to do, not the opposite.
that's an entirely fair point. I think I if I know someone who's much smarter than me, I would love their advice as opposed to try to tell them how to maneuver things in the way that I think might see fit. That's why I have Jeff here to tell me how to speak better. But wow, what an interesting concept. There must be so much in your life that kind of inspired this path to amalgamate different parts of business together. Is there anything that you can tell us, maybe either in your formative years, or a passion of yours that led you down this road to supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, Charles, I could think about two actually in my life. You and I, we are part of the Beyond Connection Circle, so a little bit of the history. I grew up in Morocco and I was born in a small village. I
Mm,
literally we have one school and one grocery shop. And when I was referring to the grocery shop, I mean it's only one and one school.
wow.
And we had these two events during the year, one just literally before the winter and then one after the winter. And that's where you have the majority of the trucks coming, because there is a big market just literally prior to the 6 months of winter, because you have to buy everything that you need, because we had so much snow in the mountain that sometimes the village was blocked for a couple of months. And also after the period of winter, you have to, it's almost like again an event to celebrate the end of the winter and go into the summertime.
Mm,
You see all those trucks coming and bringing all the goods to the market, and I was amazed how, I was always wondering who was behind it. And the second event was when I finished my MBA. I was already doing a training during the school, during the university period with a French company that manage hotel resorts around the world. But there was, at that time, was the full package. So when I joined them after my MBA full time, I was in a way trying to duplicate what I've seen during my training period and in manage a small supply chain. So I was the head of the touristical department, meaning I was able to organize trips for people, deal with the transport companies, food, etc., because I was fascinated with how this big French company was bringing people from different part of the world in one single resort. It could be in Bali, it could be anywhere in the world, and they're taking care of the transport, air tickets, planning, buses at the airport, bringing people to welcome them, having the logistic for the rooms, planning everything. So it was massive web, and I was really fascinated. So I had the luxury already at that time to work for them and in having my own little supply chain, because it was really like fully independent department, even though it's part of the company. But you organize yourself because everything was happening outside, because you're taking people for a day trip or 2 days or 3 days trip or sometimes even a week. So I had to take care of the entire small supply chain, and that's really where the love of supply chain was born in a way. And since then, I've been in that function for 27 years, which now tells you a little bit about my age. And you can see that's why we say the grass never grows in busy street, Charles.
What? What is this? Can we have a
I can say again, Jeff. I said the grass never grow in busy streets. That's why we don't have any hair in supply chain.
So just so that you know who listen to this, what we are talking about, Rachid doesn't have any hairs on his head.
Correct. That
Otherwise,
was the reference.
otherwise we don't know where it comes from. Well, Rachid, when you talk about all those things, I start to see the word very differently. That it's supply chains and logistics everywhere, and it reminds me of my personal past when I was a child and when I used computers for the first time. I thought someone must be doing those things. They just don't exist in nature. Someone must be building those softwares that I'm using. And it seems that you had the same insights when you saw what happened, and you thought, wow, people must be behind those trucks full of stuff.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's how you got interested.
And Jeff, supply chain is, even though a lot of people don't realize it actually, but supply chain is all over around us. When you go to the supermarket, I mean the food, when you go to the pure simply supermarket trying to do your grocery and you see the number of products with the made in is unbelievable. And that's all put in one place. There are people behind it. Actually, their job is to bring all together and make sure that they have the right product in the right place. And one of the best logistic people for me are actually the flower business, because the flower business, Charles and Jeffries, they have to be fresh. And think about the tulips, for example. One of the biggest country producing tulips is Holland, actually. And these guys behind the scene, they are making everything possible to deliver the tulips fresh the same day or the day after in different markets in the world. So for me, I have a lot of admiration for people that are working in the flower business.
Listen, as someone who travels quite a bit, the idea of getting from Holland to New York, while it seems like a very straightforward trip, it makes me exhausted just thinking about it. So I couldn't imagine having to do that in a regular basis for a product and the kinds of dedication that people have in the supply chain parts to make that happen. So it's a practical way of looking at it, but it's also a really romantic way to see how many people touch the product that ultimately get to a customer's hands. It's really a fantastic way of kind of putting the perspective of human power into play.
I agree. I mean, it's extremely hard for people to imagine the number of people that are touching the product. I'll give you an example. So the number of people that are working in distribution warehouses is massive. Is massive, Charles. I mean, you have an average of between 150 to 300 and you have different shifts. And when you think about the number of distribution warehouses around the world, it's absolutely phenomenal. So the logistic side of it and supply chain is a big function, and we will all need supply chain. Whether we're going to be heavily dependent on the manpower in the future, yes, but probably it will reduce the dependency because of everything that is coming to the supply chain era. And I remember when I started, there was, and that's probably nostalgic from my side, Charles. We always think that life was simple. And now we have to, and that's also what I like, by the way, in supply chain, is all this continuous learning, absolutely phenomenal for me. It just keeps your brain working and takes you to another dimension. I mean, you see now the digital transformation that is happening in the supply chain, and you need to constantly update your knowledge about, emerging technologies. Now, right now, for example, we are in the middle of integration of sensors, digital twins, predictive analytics, everything around artificial intelligence. Then there is also the sustainability practice.
Mm.
Couple of, I would say 20 years ago, it was just the beginning of green, what I would call the green product. Now it's almost like between the regulation and the consumer expectation, sustainability is constantly evolving. I'm actually now myself learning about scope 3 emission tracking and circular supply chain. Because, we start with only scope 1, we move to scope 2, and now we move to scope 3. Because at the end, the expectation from the consumer, you should be as an organization on the top of your supply chain from a sustainability point of view. Think about the geopolitical understanding as well. There is always something that is happening in the world. And recently there was the issue with the canal, the Suez Canal. And you have to find different networks. Risk management, every 5 years or every year now, there is a new risk coming from a mitigation point of view. And you have to be ready. Now we're dealing with cybersecurity risk in supply chain, which, that was not a major concern a decade ago. And that's also the part that I really love with supply chain is absolutely constantly moving, and there is something else to know and there is something else to learn.
Since you are for so long in this business, Rachid, how have things changed in the past year? Are we more efficient? Do we have more complexity? And where do you think this is going?
It's a very deep question, Jeffrey. To answer that question, I think we'll have to put a little bit into perspective, depends on the organizations. Because unfortunately, there is still a little bit of a confusion on supply chain. Where does it sit? I always had the pleasure to work with organizations, really big ones that have a function of supply chain as a real function. And I was also having a seat on the table. In a lot of small, medium organizations, supply chain doesn't have a seat on the table from a leadership point of view. And actually, we don't even know the reporting structure. So you might have actually fragmented department reporting to other department in the business, i.e. I've seen in an organization procurement, for example, reporting to finance. That's for me, first of all, back to your point, creating the complexity. Companies have the tendency to create complexity within the organization. I think what you need to do is have a clear understanding saying, what are the functions in the company that we want to have? And for me, supply chain should be definitely a function with the seat on the table. But to answer your question, with all the changes that are happening, whether it's going to make life easier or make life complicated, I think time will tell. But at least from my perspective, I have seen all the changes. It's like everything else. If your organization is ready to adapt and adopt the changes, I think you will have a fairly good and efficient system in place. But if the organization is not ready and they're not accepting the changes, and I'll give you, in a simple way, people most of the time you're buying the most efficient system, enterprise system in the world. If the organization is not ready for the change, the first thing you will hear within the organization, the system is not working. That's for me just purely a mindset of companies, where they are in terms of the maturity and where they are in terms of accepting changes and going through the process of change management. And the reality, Jeffrey, whether we like it or not, the digital transformation is going to be here. And is already here. Whether, You want to be part of the pioneer that are actually accepting the changes and leading the changes, or you want to be behind. And I can tell you, at least what I know, if you are not really thinking about transforming your supply chain now, you're gonna be having serious issues in the future. And typically that's also what happened, by the way. I forgot to mention, companies don't want to invest on the back end. They always want to invest on the front end. Let's invest on the marketing. Let's invest on the website. And they forgot that actually there is a lot of also operation needs investment, needs system, needs and I'll give you another example to say how things will simplify life as well. There is a lot of admin work in supply chain. So imagine you would introduce a technology that, for example, would reduce and would create automatic production orders and treat also the invoices and link them to the production orders. You're not only helping the procurement team, but also you're helping the finance team. So there's a lot of benefits in adopting the technology. But as I said, the mindset and the organization has definitely to be ready to adapt it and adopt the change.
I think the best businesses in the world are so effective because they can handle change at a moment's notice. And when you look at the very nature of supply chain, for me, it embodies this idea of, yes, there are so many moving parts going on from point A to point Z, different kinds of design, procurement, production, transport in general, all of these things that are being modernized. But when it comes down to it, it's about consistent improvement. And I think most people can agree that even on a personal level, that's a great kind of mindset and a great kind of way to approach any process, including the process of life, is constantly growing, evolving, taking on new skills, taking on new adventures and chapters in your life. Is there something that you've kind of built into your maybe personal day-to-day life that helps you with supply chain management that might not be the conventional skill set, or I would say conventional way of thinking, something that helps build out these skills inside of you that make you a more effective supply chain management executive?
Yeah, it's I'll have to think about that one, Charles. But I think I'll just go back to what you said in terms of the personal growth. I think is absolutely fundamental. And the way my view on that one is you have just to be a better version of yourself every day. When it comes to specifically what I developed that would help me in supply chain journey, I would say I developed certain principle guidelines that I stick to them, and through the podcast I mentioned a few of them. But one of the most important one is I actually tell my people and my team when the first time we're gonna meet and talk about supply chain and in what we're gonna be achieving is the first one is make sure that there is strategic alignment, Charles.
Mm.
And what I mean by strategic alignment in supply chain, you have to have that close relationship with your partners in the business, whether it's the brand, whether the finance, because you have to align the objectives. What you don't want to be doing is working as a silo from a supply chain, trying to achieve something that actually goes against the company. And you need to understand what are the long-term vision of the company, because what people forget is if the business wants something in 3 years, I literally have to start now because I have to find. So let's say you're looking for a new product, completely new product that is going to hit the market in 3 years. Never been done in the company. It's my role now to start already looking for productions, locations, people that can help, etc. But I need a lot of time ahead of the plan to be ready when the company has everything nailed and in the design and the briefs are ready to go to the factories. I cannot wait till the last minute and tell them, by the way, sorry guys, I need an extra 6 months before finding you the right partner. So strategic alignment is one, for me, is an important one. The second one is simplify to amplify. We always overlook the importance of simplifying things. And I really, really push always my team to go back and simplify things, because if you get things complicated, for me, it becomes like you're trying to push an elephant. It's
Yeah.
extremely hard. The third one I would say, Charles, is consider it as your business. It's not
Mhm.
because someone is paying the check and cleaning the bin, we're allowed to waste resources of the company. But if you go in every morning to the office or to your job and thinking that actually is my own business, it makes a lot of differences in terms of the decision making of whatever you do during the day. So that's an important principle. I would say these are actually a couple of principal guidelines, principle. And also when you think about what I would say to my team, if you want to take a decision, take it. That's fine. But ask yourself if it, again, it was your own business, would you do it that way? If the answer is yes, then please, by no means, go ahead. But if the answer is no, it tells you a lot of things. So I think these are few of the principal guidelines that I have and that helps me actually in terms of my journey in supply chain. I only mentioned a few of them, but there are a few others.
Yeah, I'm sure you have quite a few tools in your toolkit, so to speak. And each of those points touches on something that I'm very passionate about, which is strategy. I think one of the most overlooked part of any strategy in general is alignment,
Yes.
especially when you're in a big organization. You have so many different types of people that have so many different types of goals that by their very nature are meant to maybe uplift your organization, but they can always compete with each other because of finite resources, finite time, a million different factors. So if you're not on board with all of those, you're gonna throw a wrench in everyone's plans. But the last point is super interesting to me because my job is essentially pretending like it is my company. Like I have to go in and be an executive for a day. And I had a really awesome opportunity, not as a consultant, but as someone actually in a warehouse. You don't know this about me, but years ago, well, feels like a lifetime ago, I used to work in a warehouse stacking boxes, wrapping things up on pallets, a very typical warehouse job. And I noticed that everyone needed to walk back to the middle of the floor to get batteries for their operational scanning devices. And oh my goodness, was it a pain to go all the way back from the corner of the warehouse to the middle and then back and forth, right? Because you were going through maybe 2 or 3 batteries a shift. And the one person that I knew who would understand my issues outside of, just wasting time and being frustrated was the head of, I think he was actually the head of operations at that actual warehouse. And I talked to him and I told him my problem, and he sat there for a moment and he thought, okay, let's map this out. And he showed me how many people there are working in a particular shift. He asked me to estimate how much time it took from getting to my position to the middle of the warehouse where the batteries were. And so we timed it out. We applied the hourly rate that I was being paid to each instance of that, multiplying it by the amount of people inside. And he's like, you know, if we put batteries at every station instead of just keeping them in the middle of the floor, we would save, I think it was something north of like $200,000 a month, which equates to, like $2 million a year for one warehouse. And in my head, I was like, that is the coolest use of multiplication I've ever seen because it means money now, right? It means if efficiency doesn't just mean, okay, saving time, but it's a business's ability to say, yeah, we are making really impactful dollars and cents changes. And I just wanted to share that experience because now I understand in my own personal story the power of supply chain and how cool that kind of relates back into that. So full aside, that's a
I know
whole
it's
different
great.
story of me.
Hold on, Charles. It's great. Let me tell you one first thing.
Certainly.
When we started the podcast, you said you have no idea about supply chain.
It's
That
true.
actually not true because you just told me the story about the warehouse. So you knew a little bit about supply chain.
I get, I guess I did, but the more and more I learn about it, the more interesting it sounds. The cooler it feels to know that there are so many parts moving and that there's someone that's coordinating on top saying, we're going to make this all work together.
Let me
Now,
bring an additional insight to
yes.
the warehouse part of it. It brings me to one of the principle, the guiding principle, fact and figures.
Mm,
So I always tell my people, talk about facts and figures. The reason why I always talk about a fact, because we have the tendency to put a drama in everything. Like people will come and say, we have a massive quality issues. Well,
mm,
hold on. We're doing 120 million pieces in a yearly basis. When you say we have a massive quality issues, that entire production, what are we talking about? So I push the people to go really and look for the facts. Sometimes the facts end up actually not even relevant to talk about them. But if you leave that proportion without a fact and figures, it blow up out of proportion. And the reason why I send also figures because there you have always to put a value behind it.
mhm,
And to build on the warehouse, Charles, there is a wrong there is a wrong perception about the warehouse, and people will tell you, for example, I really don't know what is happening in my distribution warehouse because the distribution warehouse is full, but nothing is going out.
mm,
And I say, well, your problem is your distribution warehouse is full. That's your problem. That's why it's not going out. So let me explain to you, Charles. In a simple, so the way we like to compare warehouses or distribution warehouses, think about a parking in a mall.
mhm,
So in a parking in a mall during the week, Charles, you have a lot of bays because the parking is not full. So what happened? You are coming, you're parking your car, you're doing your shopping, and you're leaving very quickly. Consider the same parking mall on the weekend. The parking mall is full. What are you going to be doing with your car is doing a lot of tours, a lot of tours, a lot of, so it's going to take you probably 15 to 20 minutes before you find a spot. So that's what I said to people. Actually, don't confuse. I understand that the warehouse is all about cost and you want to optimize your space, but your warehouse should not be exceeding 85% of occupancy.
mm,
Because if you are beyond 85%, then the flow, when you have the inwards goods, you're not going to be able to put them in because your parking is full. You'll have to wait till the parking is, you free up a little bit of the parking, means you're going to have to do um, outbound and send the goods either to your retail stores or to your customers before you're being able to receive. And that's create a lot of inefficiencies in the warehouse. But this is something again that people think, the more my warehouse is full, the better I'm feel about it. Yes, I understand the cost side of it, but there is a balance between the cost and the efficiency. If you got your warehouse full 100%, you're not going to be able to get anything in, and you're not going to be able to get anything out.
too many cooks in the kitchen, you could say, right?
Yes, a little bit.
This was a huge diving deep into the world of supply chain. Rachid, you also told us that you're a fan of soccer and that you're a chef. Can you tell us a bit more about how those activities fit into your life?
You'll have to ask my wife. Because she believes that I'm hardly at home, given the number of hours that I'm spending in at work from a supply chain point of view. But also, if you add to it the soccer coaching 3 nights a week, and plus the game on the weekend, and plus sometimes the private cooking, then it becomes a lot of time that I'm spending without the family. But I think it's also something that first of all, I mean, I'm a big fan of the soccer game. And I use the soccer because in some countries we call it football, but it's something called is represents something different, especially in Australia. Football is completely different than soccer. So let's stick to the soccer terminology for the sanity purpose. For it
That's
that way.
why.
And I'm a big fan of the game, actually, in all honesty, because there is, again, a lot of strategies, there is a lot of training, there is a lot of learning. And I actually try to get inspiration from the game itself and the training and the coaching to implement in my leadership style. Because really, in the scale of a game, depends whether you really want to win the game or you want to win the league. Is a different preparation, is different training, is a team effort. Is also what are the learnings you have from every time you lose a game, etc. It's not about the result itself, but what are the learning out of it. So I'm a big fan of it, and I was a player as a kid. I couldn't have a career in soccer, but I played till almost the age of 40, and after that one, just to be on the game and in being outside and in transmitting the love of the game to the new generation. I decided to be a coach. And the cooking side of it, I owe it to my mom.
Mm,
I grew up in an environment where the kitchen was not allowed. It was actually a woman empire. As a male, you're not allowed to the kitchen, but my mom was kind enough and let me play around her, and I learned from her cooking. And when I had to go to the university, it was far away from my hometown. She was always giving me recipes that I have to cook myself, and that's the way it started. And now I'm doing private chef, not on a restaurant, but more from people that would like to have the experience of having a chef, but the comfort of their home. So I go there and I cook for people in their home actually. And I can tell you,
wow.
I'm enjoying it because it's completely different approach, Charles and Jeffrey, versus being a chef in a restaurant. Because actually you're cooking, you're talking to people, and more important also, you get an immediate feedback on the taste they're having. Because when people are having the first bite and you see, and you hear the noise and in the
Hmm.
reaction of the body, you actually that's for me that's a live feedback you're getting immediately about whether you're doing a good job or not doing a good job. So, yeah, so I love those two activities. And you know what? Guess what? I got a lot of people home happy. I got my son. He's my biggest
Hmm.
customer. He's the first one to try. He's the first one to try every time I'm trying something new. He's the first one to taste it.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I believe that cooking should be a universal skill. Everyone should learn how to cook. Uh, First of all, because well, you need to eat, but outside of that, it teaches you so much about what you like in general, and it's fun and it's self-fulfilling, and it helps others get inspired to try something new sometimes. I love cooking. So in that,
Great connection as well when you're bringing people around the meal. You create a
oh,
deep
absolutely.
connection.
Yeah, and in that vein of connection and bringing people together, part of why Jeff and I started this podcast is we wanted people to get inspired over the careers and life of professionals in different areas, and in doing so, we want people to leave with a skill or something that they can do to maybe start preparing themselves on the long journey towards where you are today. So, if you would be so kind, could you maybe tell our viewers some kind of skill they can start developing to maybe go towards the area of supply chain?
I mean, I can only simply give pieces of advice based on my experience. Obviously, everyone will have to follow and find his own way of career path, if I can say this, Charles. But I would say, first of all, is I referred to it also during the conversation. For me, one of the biggest things you will have in supply chain is, and that's the advice also to give to everyone who's starting new in supply chain, never stop learning. That's a
Mm,
very important. Supply chain is constantly changing, and staying curious is the key actually to success. The second piece of advice I would give to people in supply chain, build relationships. It's not all of the time about result, and I can talk about it. I also myself did sometimes, I did a mistake in the past, and I was more result driven as against being someone focused in a relationship. But for me, I would give now that advice based again, that's why we learn from our mistake. The best opportunities and solutions are actually coming through your network of connections
mm,
and get practical experience. Theory is great, but hands-on experience is what really matters in this field. And I give you an example, Charles. I had my own manufacturing for 6 years. I create my own denim manufacturing in Casablanca, and I managed it for 6 years. You know, it's absolutely phenomenal experience. I've been in both sides of the table. I was a customer and suddenly I become a supplier. So you understand actually both sides, which helped me in the future actually, you know, forging those relationships because I can understand the pain of a supplier, but I can also understand the pain of the customer. So I managed to find that delicate balance of, you know, being able to deliver the expectation because I've been in both sides of the table. So I would say to people, if you can get a practical experience, and like yourself, you know, you mentioned it. One of your greatest experience and moment is the time you spend in the warehouse. That's a practical experience for me. You learn out of it. And you get also the information from the mouth of the horse, if I may call it that way. But at least and you learn. And in, you know, it's also a way to tell people, you know, you cannot bullshit me because I was there. I knew what I'm talking about.
That's very valuable. All right, Rachid, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. This will be your special moment. For 2 minutes, I will give you the magic microphone. And the magic microphone is magic because it allows you to speak to everyone on Earth. And not just people who are on Earth today, but also to everyone from the next generations. You have 2 minutes now with this special microphone. What would you want to tell them?
That's the hard part, Jeff, because, you know, as we said, I like talking about myself. So is what I'm going to say in 2 minutes is the bigger question. Look, I would like probably to reflect on, you know, on something that happened this year.
Mm.
And, you know, I was going through a challenging year. 2024 particularly was extremely hard for me on a professional level and also on a personal level. You know, I was battling with a lot of frustration in a professional level, and you know, we can always talk about the story we tell ourselves. And you know, I was talking about unsupportive colleagues and CEO. I was deeply frustrated and angry. I blamed everyone and convinced myself actually that even resignation was the answer. But guess what? The real storm was brewing in my personal life, Jeff and Charles. I mean, a decade is literally 10 years of long silence. It's always a hard one to talk about between my mother and myself. And you know, I constantly crafted excuses to avoid that crucial visit till I met few people, and Charles and I are we are part of one program called Beyond Connection. And what you show in that program is actually the vulnerability side of it. And at that moment, actually, I realized the change that I needed wasn't in my circumstances. It was actually in me. And that awakening led to the most important moment of my life. And I took the courage and I visited my mom literally end of September. And guess what? 3 weeks after she passed away. And I told her I understand what she did. And she did probably the best of her ability at that time to raise me and expressed my love for her. But today, you know, I learned something that is actually when you take the full ownership of your actions, everything changes. And unless you change yourself, nothing else is going to change. So this is my commitment now, is really bringing my whole self to every moment because I know it's all me and it's all about me all the time. So that's probably would be my 2 minutes, Jeffrey and Charles.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing this.
Wow, what a powerful message. I think it's very easy to blame circumstance for whatever you're going through. I know for me personally as well, 2024 was not my year. But we have the wonderful capability that is with all humans, and that is to change
Yeah.
and to grow and to be better than we were yesterday. And Rachid, thank you so much for reminding everyone on this interview, listening, and to all those who might find us by circumstance, that we have every capability to better ourselves every single day. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful. I know I have tons to unpack, tons to think about, and I've definitely learned quite a bit about supply chain that I never thought I was going to.
Same here.
Now,
The
I'm
same.
actually the one who should be thanking you, Jeffrey, and in Charles. It's absolutely great moment as well. And for me, when I talked about that example, just to conclude, is also I was never a person who asked for help actually. And this 2024 was showing me that actually the first probably step of the healing is being able to ask for help, whether from families, whether from friends. And that's what I started doing. And guess what? There is a lot of people actually willing to help, but they don't have a magic ball to understand that you're actually in need of help unless you start expressing it. So again, ask for help. That's another advice. But yeah, but it's great. It's great opportunity, guys, and thank you for offering me the opportunity to talk today, and hopefully we'll get more opportunities in the future.
Yay! Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for all of our listeners out there, if you made it this far, make sure to like, subscribe, send it to a friend, and make sure that you're growing every day and making every day better than it was the day before. Be well, and catch new episodes every Wednesday of Casually Pro. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.